My name is Sophia Collins, and I was 58 years old the night my mother-in-law called me a gold digger at the dinner table. We sat in her formal dining room, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over expensive china and polished silver. My husband William sat to my right, his sister Amanda across from us, and various relatives filled the remaining seats. The evening had felt strange from the beginning, conversations forced and artificial. Then my mother-in-law, Victoria, stood with her wine glass raised. She smiled sweetly, her voice carrying across the table. To family, she began, pausing dramatically. Though some join us for reasons less pure than others. Sophia married my son quite late in life, didn't she? How convenient that William has such comfortable means. Laughter rippled around the table. Nervous, knowing laughter. My face burned. I froze completely, wine glass halfway to my lips. Then something unexpected happened. The family lawyer, standing near the doorway, suddenly spoke my name. "Mrs. Collins," he said firmly, and the entire room went silent. "Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. Every share helps these stories reach someone who needs to hear them. Let's keep the conversation going." The silence felt suffocating. Every eye turned toward the lawyer, then back to me. Victoria's smile remained fixed, but confusion flickered in her eyes. Why was the lawyer interrupting her moment of triumph? My hands trembled in my lap. I wanted to stand to defend myself, to explain that I'd brought love and care into this marriage, not greed. But words stuck in my throat. Victoria seized the silence, doubling down on her cruelty. "Oh, don't look so shocked, dear. We all know the truth. A woman your age, never married before, suddenly appearing when William's father had just passed and left him everything? The timing was rather calculated, wouldn't you say?" More uncomfortable laughter. Amanda smirked into her napkin. William stared at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. That's when I understood. This dinner was never about family unity. It was a public trial, and I was the defendant. The lawyer shifted his weight, briefcase in hand, but didn't speak further. He just watched, expression unreadable. Why was he here? And why had he said my name like that? The lawyer cleared his throat, and everyone looked at him expectantly. But instead of speaking, he said quietly, "This may not be the right moment for certain discussions." Victoria's smile widened triumphantly, interpreting his words as confirmation that I wasn't worthy of defense. She sat down gracefully, having delivered her blow. Around the table, relatives resumed eating, the tension easing into satisfied murmurs. I'd been dismissed, emotionally, socially, completely. My appetite vanished. I pushed food around my plate mechanically while conversation moved to safer topics. But inside, something shifted. Victoria had humiliated me publicly, and my husband had sat silent, complicit in his mother's cruelty. The lawyer remained standing near the doorway, watching the scene unfold with careful attention. When dessert was served, he excused himself quietly, nodding to me as he left. That small gesture, barely noticeable to others, felt significant. As the evening dragged toward its conclusion, I made a decision. This wouldn't be the last word. I didn't know how yet, but I would not let this stand. The drive home was suffocating. William drove in complete silence, hands gripping the steering wheel, jaw tight. I stared out the passenger window, watching streetlights blur past. Finally, I spoke. "You knew she was going to say that. It wasn't a question." William's silence confirmed it. "She mentioned she wanted to clear the air," he admitted finally, voice strained. "I thought she'd be more subtle. More subtle. Not that she'd be wrong. Not that he'd defend me. Just more subtle." The betrayal cut deeper than Victoria's insult. My husband had known his mother planned to humiliate me and had let me walk into that dinner unprepared. He'd chosen his mother over me, chosen family loyalty over basic decency. When we arrived home, William went straight to his study, closing the door firmly. I stood in our empty living room, replaying the evening in my mind. The calculated cruelty, the rehearsed laugh lines, the lawyer's strange interruption. Sleep felt impossible. I made tea and sat in the kitchen, trying to process what had happened and what it meant for my marriage. As dawn light filtered through the windows, I found myself thinking about the past 3 years since I'd married William. Memories flooded back, moments I'd dismissed as awkward or unfortunate but now recognized as deliberate cruelty. Victoria's jokes about my age, 55 and finally caught someone. Comments about my clothes, is that from a discount store, dear? Whispers at family gatherings that stopped when I entered rooms. The times she'd told relatives I'd been desperate for security, laughing as if it were obviously true. Amanda's pointed questions about my financial contributions to the household. The way Victoria insisted on separate holidays, ensuring I felt excluded from family traditions. Each incident had felt painful but manageable in isolation. Together, they formed a clear pattern of systematic degradation. They'd never accepted me, never saw me as family. I'd been temporary in their eyes from the beginning, an inconvenient addition they'd tolerated while planning my emotional exile. I stopped crying somewhere around sunrise. Tears gave way to cold, clear thinking. I needed to understand what was happening and why the lawyer had been there. I thought about what I'd actually brought to this marriage. I'd met William at a charity fundraiser 2 months after his father's death. He'd been grieving, lost, overwhelmed by suddenly managing a substantial estate. I'd offered friendship first, listening, supporting, never pushing. Our relationship developed slowly, naturally. When we married a year later, I'd brought emotional stability into his life. I'd become his companion, his confidant, the person who helped him navigate grief and responsibility. I'd given up my small apartment and modest independence to move into his family home. I'd attended endless family obligations, smiled through Victoria's passive aggression, organized holidays and gatherings. I'd cared for William during a serious illness last year, spending weeks at his bedside. I'd sacrificed friendships and routines to accommodate his needs and his family's expectations. But none of that counted to them. They measured worth in bank statements, not devotion. To Victoria, I was a gold digger simply because I'd married her son after his inheritance. The fact that I'd loved him, supported him, never asked for anything material, none of that mattered. I realized they'd never seen me as family, only as temporary, an interloper to be tolerated and eventually removed. The next morning, exhausted from sleeplessness, I was making coffee when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Collins? This is Harrison Blake, the family attorney. I apologize for the awkwardness last evening. My heart raced. Why were you there, Mr. Blake? He paused. That's actually why I'm calling. I need to speak with you privately. It concerns your future and matters related to the estate. Would you be available to meet this week? His tone was professional but urgent. What kind of matters? I'd prefer to discuss them in person. It's rather sensitive. We arranged to meet at his office in 2 days. After hanging up, my hands shook as I set down my phone. What could the lawyer possibly need to discuss with me? William's father had died 3 years ago. The estate had been settled. Everything had gone to William as the eldest son. Why would any of it involve me now? The voicemail notification remained on my screen, and I saved it carefully. Whatever Harrison Blake needed to tell me felt important, potentially life-changing. I just didn't know how yet. Harrison Blake's office was downtown, housed in an old building with modern renovations. His receptionist led me to a conference room where Harrison waited with several thick folders spread across the polished table. He was in his 60s, gray-haired, with kind eyes that studied me carefully. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Collins," he began. "I've been the family attorney for over 20 years. I handled William's father's estate personally." He slid a document toward me. "I need to show you something that's become relevant recently." The document was part of the estate trust, pages of legal language I struggled to parse. Harrison pointed to specific sections. "Your father-in-law, Theodore Collins, was very specific about protecting family members from emotional abuse and manipulation. He witnessed his own mother suffer similar treatment and wanted safeguards built into the estate structure." My breath caught. "I don't understand. Your name appears in several clauses as William's spouse, entitled to certain protections and considerations. Theodore anticipated potential family conflicts." Harrison's expression was serious. "Recent events suggest those protections may now be necessary. My name appeared more than once in those documents, in contexts I'd never imagined. Harrison explained further, pointing to a specific clause buried in the trust documentation. Clause 17 addresses character, conduct, and treatment of spouses. It states that beneficiaries who engage in sustained emotional abuse, public humiliation, or deliberate exclusion of family members may face automatic modifications to their inheritance structure. I read the words slowly, hardly believing them. Theodore had anticipated exactly what Victoria was doing. Violations trigger changes? I asked, voice shaking. Yes. The trust isn't simply distributed once and forgotten. It contains ongoing stipulations about behavior and family treatment. Theodore believed wealth carried responsibility, including responsibility to treat family members with dignity. Harrison pulled out another folder. I've been monitoring the family situation as part of my duties. Recent behavior, particularly the incident at dinner, may qualify as violations of these terms. My mind reeled. What kind of changes are we talking about? That depends on the severity and documentation of the mistreatment. But it could include redistribution of certain assets, modification of control, even complete restructuring in extreme cases. Harrison met my eyes directly. Mrs. Collins, your father-in-law specifically included language protecting spouses from exactly what you're experiencing. I left Harrison's office in a daze, understanding for the first time that I wasn't powerless. Theodore Collins, a man I'd never met, had anticipated Victoria's cruelty and built protections into his estate specifically to prevent it. But Harrison had been clear, I needed to document everything. No emotional outbursts, no dramatic confrontations. Just facts, dates, witnesses, evidence. I made a decision. I would say nothing to William or his family about this meeting. No warnings, no threats, no hints. I'd let them continue underestimating me, believing I was broken and defeated. Let them think the gold digger comment had landed its intended blow. Meanwhile, I'd quietly gather what Harrison needed. That evening, William mentioned another family dinner scheduled for the following week. Mother wants to smooth things over, he said awkwardly. She thinks it would be good for everyone to spend time together. I recognized it immediately as damage control. Someone, probably Amanda, had warned Victoria that her public insult might have consequences. So now came the gracious matriarch act, the reconciliation theater. I'll attend, I said simply. William looked relieved. He had no idea what was actually happening. Neither did Victoria. A second family dinner was announced, and I accepted the invitation with conditions. The days before the dinner, I spent time carefully documenting the past 3 years. I found old emails where Victoria had made cutting remarks, supposedly joking messages that now read as calculated cruelty. I documented the separate holiday dinners, the family events I'd been excluded from, the times Victoria had publicly questioned my motives for marrying William. I reached out to household staff who'd witnessed uncomfortable moments, Theodore's former assistant, the family's longtime housekeeper. They'd seen things, heard things, and when approached carefully, they were willing to provide written statements. I wasn't building a case for revenge. I was building documentation for protection, creating an undeniable record of systematic mistreatment. Harrison had been clear. Emotions wouldn't matter in estate proceedings, only facts. Meanwhile, I attended the reconciliation dinner with William, playing my expected role perfectly. The trap they'd set was obvious. Victoria wanted me to appear grateful for her gracious forgiveness, to accept my place and stop causing problems. I saw exactly what they were doing, and I accepted their invitation with one condition, that Harrison Blake attend as well, ostensibly to discuss some routine estate matters. The reconciliation dinner was held at Victoria's home again, the same dining room where she'd called me a gold digger 2 weeks earlier. This time, the atmosphere was theatrically warm. Victoria greeted me with air kisses and compliments about my dress. Amanda chatted pleasantly about neutral topics. Even William seemed relaxed, believing this nightmare was ending. But I noticed things others missed. The way Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. How Amanda watched me carefully, assessing whether I'd been properly intimidated. The subtle condescension in their tone, speaking to me like I was a child who'd learned her lesson. Victoria played gracious hostess beautifully, pouring wine, laughing at jokes, treating me with exaggerated kindness. She believed I was broken, that her insult had landed perfectly and crushed my spirit. She thought this dinner would cement her victory and my submission. Harrison Blake arrived late, apologizing for a scheduling conflict. He took a seat near the end of the table, mostly silent, observing the family dynamics with careful attention. I noticed him watching Victoria's performance, noting the artificial warmth and underlying contempt. At one point, our eyes met across the table. He nodded almost imperceptibly. He saw exactly what I saw. After that dinner, Harrison contacted me with a request. He needed me to provide detailed documentation of specific incidents, emails with timestamps, names of witnesses present during humiliating moments, exact dates when I'd been excluded from family events. Nothing dramatic, he emphasized. Just facts. Dates, times, what was said, who was present. The story becomes evidence when it's documented properly. I spent a week creating a comprehensive timeline. Every cutting comment. Every deliberate exclusion. Every time Victoria had questioned my motives publicly. The time she'd announced at a charity gala that William had married out of loneliness, rather than love. The Christmas I'd spent alone because Victoria had insisted on family-only celebrations and made clear I didn't qualify. The Easter dinner where she'd seated me at a separate table from the family, claiming space constraints. Individually, these moments seemed petty, almost laughable. Together, they painted a portrait of systematic emotional abuse designed to break me down gradually. Harrison reviewed my documentation carefully, adding it to his files. "This is exactly what we need," he said quietly. "Your father-in-law knew this might happen. He built protections specifically for situations like this." The paper trail transformed my pain into evidence, my experiences into legal documentation. Harrison showed me more of Theodore's estate documents, explaining their full scope. The trust Theodore had created wasn't just about distributing wealth. It was about protecting family members from the kind of emotional manipulation he'd witnessed in his own childhood. Theodore's mother was treated terribly by his father's family, Harrison explained. They called her similar names, questioned her worth, made her feel like an outsider until she died. Theodore vowed that any spouse marrying into his family would be protected from that treatment. The estate structure included clauses about dignity, respect, and family conduct. Violations weren't just moral failings. They had legal and financial consequences built directly into the inheritance structure. "Your mother-in-law is unknowingly violating multiple provisions," Harrison said. "The dinner where she publicly insulted you? That alone constitutes a breach of the dignity clause. Her ongoing pattern of exclusion and humiliation? Even more serious." I felt simultaneously validated and overwhelmed. Theodore Collins, a man I'd never known, was protecting me from beyond the grave. His foresight, his compassion, his understanding of how power and wealth could corrupt family relationships, all of it was now shielding me from Victoria's cruelty. The will they'd never read carefully was about to change everything. One evening, William came home from having drinks with his mother, looking troubled. We sat in the living room, and he spoke hesitantly. "Mother mentioned you've been meeting with Harrison Blake." My heart pounded, but I kept my expression neutral. He needed some documentation about household matters. "She's worried you're trying to cause problems. She asked me to." He trailed off, unable to finish. "To what, William?" "To keep you in line." The words hung between us, stark and ugly. William looked ashamed but not quite regretful. He'd admitted his mother pressured him to control me, to ensure I didn't make waves or challenge the family hierarchy. That confession changed everything. Any lingering hope I'd held for our marriage crumbled. William wasn't my partner. He was Victoria's son first, my husband second. "Is that what you want?" I asked quietly. "To keep me in line?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. What William didn't know was that Harrison Blake had been standing in our hallway during this conversation, having arrived for a scheduled document signing. He'd heard every word. Later, as Harrison prepared to leave, he spoke softly. "That's exactly the kind of evidence we need. Coercion, control, pressure from family members." The lawyer heard everything. 2 weeks later, Harrison informed me the estate was initiating a formal character review of beneficiaries. This wasn't accusatory yet, Just standard questions about family dynamics and treatment of household members. Letters went out to Victoria, Amanda, and other trust beneficiaries requesting they meet individually with estate representatives to discuss family matters. The questions were carefully worded to avoid revealing the true purpose. How would they describe relationships within the family? Were there any conflicts or tensions? How did they view the integration of new family members? Victoria panicked. She called William repeatedly, demanding to know why the estate was suddenly asking questions. She contacted Harrison directly, her usual confidence replaced with nervous concern. "This is routine review," Harrison assured her calmly. "The trust requires periodic assessments of family dynamics to ensure compliance with Theodore's wishes. Nothing to worry about if everything is appropriate." But Victoria sensed danger. She'd spent decades believing the estate was hers to control through William. Now, suddenly, that control felt threatened. She tried calling me several times. I didn't answer. Let her worry. Let her wonder what I'd told Harrison, what evidence existed, what consequences might be coming. The review process moved forward methodically, professionally, gathering statements and documentation. Victoria finally reached me when I was at the grocery store. Her voice on the phone was carefully modulated, apologetic but with an undercurrent of threat. "Sophia, darling, I think we need to talk privately." Woman to woman. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. Victoria arrived overdressed for the casual setting, armor of designer clothes and jewelry. She started with apologies. "I may have been too harsh at that dinner. Family gatherings can be stressful, and sometimes I speak without thinking. I hope you can forgive me." I said nothing, just sipped my coffee and waited. When I didn't immediately accept her apology, her tone shifted slightly. Of course, it would be unfortunate if this misunderstanding caused problems for the family. William would be devastated if there were complications with the estate. I'm sure you wouldn't want to hurt him like that. There it was, the threat wrapped in concern. She was suggesting I drop whatever I was doing, accept my place, or risk damaging William. I recorded nothing. I just listened, memorizing every word, every shift in tone. Later, I provided Harrison with a detailed account of the conversation. Her words contradicted her earlier statements to the estate representatives, revealing her inconsistency and manipulation. The family turned against me systematically. Amanda called, accusing me of stirring up trouble and threatening the family's stability. Other relatives sent messages suggesting I was being vindictive and ungrateful. William grew distant, spending more time at his mother's house, choosing her side more openly. At a family gathering I'd been obligated to attend, the atmosphere was hostile. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. People whispered behind hands, shooting me disapproving glances. I was being painted as the villain, the gold digger who'd trapped poor William and was now trying to manipulate the estate for personal gain. But I remained calm throughout everything. Polite when addressed, silent when provoked. I didn't defend myself, didn't argue, didn't take the bait. My composure seemed to unsettle them more than anger would have. They wanted me to break down, to reveal myself as the greedy opportunist they'd claimed I was. Instead, I stayed dignified, gracious, unshakable. Harrison monitored everything, documenting each hostile interaction, each attempt at intimidation. The family's behavior was building our case more effectively than any argument I could make. Finally, Victoria announced a final family dinner, a complete gathering of the Collins family to discuss important matters. Everyone was required to attend. I accepted the invitation immediately. The final dinner was scheduled. We returned to Victoria's formal dining room, the site of both previous dinners. Same table, same expensive china, same crystal chandeliers. Even the seating arrangement was identical. Victoria at the head, William to my right, Amanda across from us, relatives filling other positions. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Victoria wanted a do-over, a chance to reassert control and put me firmly in my place once and for all. The meal began with forced cheerfulness. Victoria made toasts to family unity and healing. Amanda spoke about the importance of supporting each other through difficult times. The message was clear. I was expected to surrender, to accept my role as the outsider who'd caused temporary problems but would now behave appropriately. Dinner progressed through multiple courses. Conversation remained superficial but tense, everyone waiting for something to happen without knowing what. Then, just as dessert was being served, Harrison Blake stood from his seat near the end of the table. The room fell silent. He'd been quiet throughout the meal, and most family members had forgotten he was present. Now, everyone turned to face him. "I apologize for the interruption," Harrison said formally. "But I have estate matters that require immediate discussion." Victoria's face went pale. Harrison opened his briefcase and removed several folders, organizing them deliberately on the table. The casual dinner atmosphere evaporated instantly, replaced with legal formality. As executor of Theodore Collins's estate, I'm required to review family conduct and ensure compliance with trust provisions. Over the past months, I've documented concerning behavior that necessitates addressing. Victoria tried to interrupt, but Harrison raised his hand. "Mrs. Victoria Collins, you have engaged in sustained emotional abuse toward your daughter-in-law, including public humiliation, deliberate social exclusion, and systematic attempts to undermine her position within this family." He pulled out documentation. My timeline, witness statements, the email chain, everything. On March 15th, you publicly called Mrs. Sophia Collins a gold digger at a family dinner, suggesting she married your son for financial reasons. Multiple witnesses confirmed this occurred. Victoria's face flushed. That was a joke. It was witnessed, documented, and constitutes a violation of the estate's dignity clause. Further investigation revealed patterns of similar behavior extending over 3 years, including holiday exclusions, disparaging comments, and coordinated family pressure designed to force Mrs. Collins into submission. Harrison's voice remained professional, clinical. These actions violate multiple provisions of Theodore Collins's trust agreement. The room was utterly silent. Harrison continued methodically. Clause 17 of the trust states that beneficiaries engaging in emotional abuse, public humiliation, or systematic exclusion of family members shall face automatic modifications to inheritance distributions. Based on documented evidence, Mrs. Victoria Collins, you are in violation of these terms. He slid documents across the table toward Victoria. Effective immediately, your administrative control over discretionary trust distributions is revoked. Additionally, 20% of assets previously designated to your control are being redistributed according to the protective spouse provision. Victoria's face went white. You can't. These provisions were established by Theodore Collins and are legally binding. The trust was designed specifically to prevent the kind of treatment you've inflicted on your daughter-in-law. Harrison turned to Amanda. Miss Amanda Collins, you participated in and encouraged this behavior. Your trust distributions are being reduced by 15%, reallocated according to the same protective provisions. Amanda gasped. This is ridiculous. She's manipulating you. Mrs. Sophia Collins provided documentation and testimony, which was corroborated by independent witnesses including household staff. This isn't manipulation. It's enforcement of your grandfather's wishes. Harrison looked at William. Mr. William Collins, your passive participation and failure to protect your spouse constitute violations of the Spousal Dignity Clause. However, since you hold primary inheritance, modifications are limited to administrative oversight. Victoria finally found her voice. She married him for money. This proves it. Mrs. Victoria Collins, your father-in-law specifically anticipated such accusations. His trust protects spouses precisely because he knew family members might question their motives. Your accusations don't justify your behavior. They demonstrate exactly why these protections were necessary. The clause had activated. Assets shifted. Authority changed hands. Legally, cleanly, irrevocably. Victoria looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks. William faced an impossible choice: support his mother and risk further estate complications, or finally defend his wife and preserve what remained of our marriage. He hesitated. That hesitation was his answer. We sat in our living room one evening, the space between us feeling like miles. I need time to process this, William said. It's complicated. She's my mother. And I'm your wife, I replied quietly. Your mother publicly humiliated me. She systematically tried to drive me out of this family. And you let her. I was caught in the middle. No, William. You chose the middle. You chose neutrality when you should have chosen your spouse. He had no response. His hesitation cost him more than he realized. It cost him whatever remained of my respect and trust. I made my own decision that night. Regardless of estate matters or financial outcomes, I couldn't stay in a marriage where my husband valued his mother's approval over my dignity. Harrison had made clear I was protected financially. The trust provisions ensured my security. I didn't need William's protection anymore. I had Theodore's foresight instead. I filed for divorce 3 days later, citing irreconcilable differences. I left the marriage without shouting, without dramatic confrontations, without begging William to choose me. I simply packed my belongings, hired movers, and relocated to a smaller but beautiful apartment downtown. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly smooth. The estate provisions complicated things in my favor. I was entitled to significant assets as the wrong spouse under Theodore's protective clauses. William's attorney tried negotiating, but Harrison was immovable. Mrs. Collins is entitled to these protections under the trust. Your client's failure to defend his spouse activated penalty provisions affecting marital asset division. I walked away with financial security I'd never sought, money I'd never wanted. But I also walked away with something more valuable, my dignity intact and my self-respect restored. The family finally understood who I was. Not a gold digger. Not an opportunist. Just a woman who loved their son genuinely, brought stability and companionship into his life, and asked only for basic respect in return. They'd given me cruelty instead. And Theodore Collins, with remarkable foresight, had built consequences for exactly that kind of treatment. Victoria tried calling once, leaving a voicemail asking to meet. I deleted it without listening completely. There was nothing left to say. The Collins family fractured in the weeks following my departure. Victoria's loss of control over trust distributions meant she could no longer leverage financial pressure to maintain family authority. Her power base crumbled. Amanda, facing her own financial reductions, blamed her mother for creating the situation. They fought publicly at family gatherings, each accusing the other of causing the estate problems. Other relatives distanced themselves, unwilling to risk their own inheritances by association with Victoria's violations. William withdrew from family events, embarrassed by the scandal and conflicted about his role in everything. Victoria found herself increasingly isolated. The matriarch who'd commanded respect through fear and financial control discovered that power evaporates quickly when its foundation collapses. Her friends in social circles heard about the estate dispute. Whispers spread about emotional abuse and family dysfunction. Her reputation suffered. She reached out to me one final time through a handwritten letter delivered to my apartment. The envelope was expensive stationery, her handwriting elegant and careful. I held the letter for a long time before opening it. Inside were apologies, explanations, justifications, all the things she couldn't say when she had power but now desperately needed me to hear. She asked for reconciliation, for understanding, for a chance to make things right. I sat in my new apartment, Victoria's letter in my hands, and made my final decision. I wouldn't respond. Not out of anger or vindictiveness, but out of self-respect and the understanding that some relationships aren't worth salvaging. Victoria had spent 3 years systematically trying to destroy me. She'd questioned my motives, humiliated me publicly, poisoned family relationships, and pressured my husband to control me. She'd done all of this when she held power and felt untouchable. Now she wanted forgiveness because consequences had arrived. But forgiveness without accountability is meaningless. And I didn't need closure from her. I'd found it within myself. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, unopened and unanswered. Then I looked around my apartment, at the life I was building on my own terms. I'd accepted a position at a non-profit organization supporting domestic abuse survivors. My experiences, painful as they were, had given me insight and empathy I could now channel into helping others. The woman Victoria called a gold digger had left with her name intact, her dignity restored, and her future secured, not through William's money, but through Theodore's wisdom and protection. She'd wanted to humiliate me at that dinner, to put me permanently in my place. Instead, she'd taught everyone exactly who I was. Not desperate. Not greedy. not temporary. Just someone who understood her worth and refused to accept less than basic human dignity. And that, I realized, was victory enough.